everybody. Hey, Gary's in the house live with me today. I'm excited about that. Welcome back to Tuesday Training. We are diving in here with some workshopping today. We're going to do functional anatomy workshopping. That's kind of fun. Hey, Gary, it's nice to see you live. How have you been? It's nice to see you. Oh, you're muted. I can't hear you. I want to hear you.
Happy New Year. Good to see you too.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
It's good to see you too. I know, right? Here we are at the very beginning of a new year. We met last week and talked about functional anatomy and alignment and pain relief and regular anatomy. Not that functional anatomy isn't regular. And today we're going to do some workshopping on some functional anatomy. And I thought of you, Gary. I think this is going to be really fun for you because
Okay.
yeah, because we've been talking, you and I have been talking about functional anatomy and joint actions and muscles, and that's where we're at today. So I'm so glad that you're here live. It's exciting. Let me make sure I can see everybody who's joining us on
Hmm.
YouTube. I'm glad that you all are here. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm your host for the hour. I'm Gina Schatz. I'm here to talk about everything I've done clinically for the last 31 years so that I can support you as manual and movement practitioners do excellent work in the world. That's what we're here to do. Excellent work in the world, right? So there we are live. If you guys are here watching live on YouTube, not on Zoom, live on YouTube, feel free to use the chat and type in your questions, and I will absolutely happily answer questions for you. We're going to move through a slide share too today. I feel very high tech today. We've got it all set up. I don't usually slide share, and I've said a few times that we um, can't really do some workshopping when we're here on Tuesdays. I was like, you know what? As soon as I hear the word can't, I'm like, let's fix that. Let's do it. So we're gonna workshop it out a little bit. We'll see how it goes. If it bombs, we won't do it again. But if it's excellent, then we know we have this new angle, which is great.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Where can I find the recording from last week? Because I did miss it. Is it somewhere or is it
Well, the replays are always on YouTube, so you can always find it there. And I
okay.
think you're in the club with us, Gary. So the replays are posted there as well in the classroom.
Okay,
So
in the classroom. Okay,
you
thank you.
got all kinds of options on where to find it. So I'm
Yeah.
excited for you. Yeah. So we're going to move through some functional anatomy today, like I said, and I want to announce just before we start our Pin It to Win It game, which we also started last week. Pin It to Win It, both Jackie and Cheryl, you both won, so that's very exciting. Look, today should be just about by the time we're wrapped up here, you should find a link in your inbox. We do have emails for both of you to send you that training. So that's great. If you're like, what's this Pin It to Win It thing and how do I win? Well, I'm so glad that you asked. Pin It to Win It is a new feature that we added in here at the beginning of the year. And that is that while we're here during the training on Tuesdays, I will pin on the bottom corner of the screen a letter. And as we move through the training for the hour together, I will continue to pin another letter at the bottom of the screen. And as you are participating here in the training, you just collect all the letters. And then at the end, it spells a word. And then you'll win a training. I'll send you an extra training for participating in this training fully. So it's really about rewarding us for keeping our head in the game and participating and really stretching ourselves. So that was a fun feature that we added in last week, and Jackie and Cheryl, you both won. So again, look in your inbox. If you are here and you're watching on the replay, or you're live with us and I don't yet have your email address, what you'll do with Pin It to Win It is pin the word in the comment section below the video. But if I don't know who you are, I'll send you a note on YouTube and you'll need to give us your email address so I can send it to you. I wish I could put the links directly below our video on YouTube, but YouTube doesn't like external links. So it will get blocked and then you won't see it and then you'll think we didn't keep our word. So just make sure that we have your email address. Or if you plan to win your Pin It to Win It, you could always just preemptively email us because you have access to our email, even if you're here for the first time. You can access our email through the YouTube channel. So just send us your email address and let us know that you are a Pin It to Win It winner. Hey, Val, nice to see you today. And we'll get you the training that way. So Pin It to Win It every week, a new word. Once you find the word, pin it in the comment section below the video. And as soon as we have your email address, we will send you another training. So that's how you play and win Pin It to Win It. So exciting. I think Val's on a phone call. Val, you're on a phone call? You're not talking to us, are you? Okay, good. Um, Good that we didn't miss anything that you said. All right, perfect. So here we go. We're going to dive into some functional anatomy. Last week we talked again about the definition, the running definition for functional anatomy, and folks use it differently. The way I use functional anatomy is the parts, the musculoskeletal parts, and how they're designed to move. And I include in that the movement that they make. So when we're talking about the 8 principles of anatomy, which we spent each week in November and December reviewing a principle each week, a few of them well, they all apply to functional anatomy, but a few of them at the very beginning were literally these parts and how they work, right? So movement is the way we're designed. So we need to know what the movement is. That's joint action. What does that joint action is muscles when they contract. We need to know what contraction is, the action that moves a joint and creates a form in the body, creates movement for us to walk across the floor. That's not stretching. That's contracting, and then lengthening is in response to that. Another one of our anatomy principles. And so we rolled out each one of these principles week by week in Tuesday training. We also are working on those 8 anatomy principles inside our club. We're working through the entire course of all 8 anatomy principles, what to do with them. We're workshopping it out and we're masterminding it together. Our advocates are running meeting groups every week. So you actually have perfect, like in real time opportunities to not only learn, but apply. And I really, really recommend that we do that, guys. Like, we don't want to just sit and take good notes this year, if that's what you were doing before now. We want to take really good notes and we want to immediately go and implement, put it into action, because it doesn't land the same. What we write down on paper, or even, yeah, Val, right? Or even how we hear it, then you go to do it and you're like, I have 3 thumbs. What do I do? Or I can't remember what my notes said. It's fine to have reference materials when you're at work. Absolutely. I had bookshelves in my office for many, many years, and I just pull out a book and look up something. So it's not about that you shouldn't have reference materials or that you have to have everything preserved in memory. That's not what I mean. But you want to be able to be fluid in your skill set, right? If you're a manual practitioner, you want to be able to like get the job done and not have to stop, start, stop, start. And same thing if you're a movement practitioner. If you're a movement practitioner, your people are there to move. So you want to be able to move with them and not have to stop to think about what to do to have them move and then stop and then have to think about it. So we want to be able to implement. It's the only way to build skill and the only way to build confidence is to have tons of knowledge and tons of skill. That's how you become excellent. So we're doing that here in concept. We're also doing it in real time in the club where we're workshopping it out. And in this particular course, the applied principles, 8 functional principles of applied functional anatomy, and that's a lot of a mouthful. It's like a lot of applieds and all the things. But in that particular course, we really look at movement and then apply it and then look at it and then apply it. Now, one of the ways that that's difficult, though, to look at movement and then apply it is that when movement is happening inherently, it's in motion. I mean, that seems sort of interesting and like obvious, but it's difficult to identify where there's a problem if identifying what's actually happening is already difficult. So what we do in our academy, the way we learn movement is we snapshot it, which is not easy to do. In fact, I just taught another gait workshop over the weekend. Teaching people how to optimize the way they walk is not easy to do while they're walking. You've got to slow it down and find the place where they're, kind of going around what should be happening or cheating a little bit, not deliberately like a cheater, but you recruiting another muscle to do the job instead of the one that's supposed to do the job. When we're optimizing and making changes for people, that's where we're honing in on our attention for them, on the places where it's difficult. And in order to find out where that is, we've got to be able to extract that from the rest of the movement. So you can obviously work on movement while you're in it. My experience of repatterning someone's movement and making permanent changes, like you asked us that the last time we were here live, Gary, like how do you know if they got it? By slowing it down. And the reason that we know we need to slow it down is also in one of our anatomy principles that the nervous system has to memorize that pattern. And in order to do that, it takes time and repetition. So again, changing movement while you're in it is very difficult. It's not impossible to change movement though. And the way I find best practices, the way I do it clinically and I teach all of you is to snapshot out like a Kodak moment, a part of movement that requires some attention. What part would that be? The part where they're not doing it well, where they're not optimized, where you recognize the joint action isn't clean, or the muscle that's supposed to do that action isn't the one that's contracting, or where they're having discomfort. Any one of those places would be the indicator of like where to snapshot it out and then just focus there. What do you focus on? You focus on what joint action is meant to be happening, right? One of our anatomy principles. What muscle is supposed to do that joint action? Another anatomy principle. And then identifying whether it is. And that's where the skill set comes in. That's where you got to take it into the field and actually practice that. We can't sometimes know that on paper looking at someone who has a musculoskeletal discrepancy because it doesn't look like it does on paper. That's the point. It's not how we're designed when there's a discrepancy, it's what they're doing with the design when there's a discrepancy. So that's part of why I really encourage you to like take it into the field and practice it. Because what you see it's supposed to look like on paper is not going to match someone who needs you to optimize it and change it for them. There's going to be a disparity between how it looks on paper and what they're actually showing up with. You want to be able to bridge that gap. Hence the importance for workshopping it out. Is that making sense? Yeah, it's landing. Okay, great. Hi guys, I see you guys are here. I don't see who's here. I just know that you are here on YouTube. Thanks for being here. Let us know that you're here in the chat. And if you have any questions, you can write them down there as well. We're going to workshop out today a little bit, mostly on paper. So this is part of the visual assessment workshopping and putting our knowledge to visual assessment. It's not entirely what I mean when I invite you guys to go implement. So workshopping is not always implementing. And I don't want to split hairs on the definition, but I really want to drive this point home because we're at the beginning of this year and we really get to up-level our skill and like catapult ourselves into the next stratosphere of skill and confidence. So workshopping it out means rather than you just listening to me and then taking notes on something that might strike your fancy, workshopping means interacting with the information. You and I are going to interact with the information. That's what we're going to do today. Not the same as implementing, which is go take it out into the universe, into your treatment setting and work on somebody else with it, not talking shop with a colleague. Okay, I guess that's the best way to make that that discernment. And I really want you guys to have that. Okay, so we're going to workshop it out today and talk it through a little bit. And I'm going to share some images, like I said. I like to use yoga postures as the medium for visual assessment on movement. And Val's laughing because a lot of people don't like this at first when we're in the mastery program together. They're like, I'm not a yoga teacher. I don't want to be a yoga teacher. Why are you yoga talking at me? Here's why. Because yoga is one of the only movement practices that we have where there are inherent Kodak moments, where there are already snapshotted actions, right? There's joint actions and then we hold it. And then there's joint actions and then we hold it. The truth is you could do workshopping on joint
Yes.
actions with pretty much any movement, sport, or position that you want to put the body in. Absolutely. But if we're all looking at the same image, we want to have the same image in mind. So I grab yoga postures for that. You don't have to know yoga. I was going to say it 5,000 times. You don't need to know what the yoga pose is. You don't need to know if it's called downward dog. All I ask us to do as we're working through functional anatomy is what joint action are you seeing? You don't have to know the name of the yoga pose. You don't even have to own any Lululemon. You just got to be able to identify the joint action and then the muscle that does that action, and then be able to take that out into your practice and identify if there's a discrepancy with some of that. Okay. So we're going to look at yoga poses now. I'm giving us plenty of a prelude so that no one gets to freak out. Freaking out at this point would be just making up a story because I already prepared us all, right? So we're about to dive into looking at yoga postures and everybody's going to be just fine. No one's going to pass out. Okay. All right. So I'm going to share my slides with you, which I'm very excited to do this time. And I'm just going to call out a couple joint actions. We'll workshop it together. If you're here watching live on YouTube, you can use the chat to type in your answers. That's fine. And Gary and Val, if you want to play along, and you can come off mute, you can do that. You could also use the chat while we're here today too. Okay. So this particular yogi, Kim, she lives in Sweden, Switzerland, Sweden. And she's amazing. I mean, just look at the form here, right? I really appreciate her sharing all of these beautiful postures with all of us on social media. So I've shared her YouTube, her IG handle right here. These are straight up her, and she's just beautiful in the way she moves. And I also really like that she has clean joint actions. So what I said earlier was like when we're recognizing that a client of ours needs help, it's usually not a clean joint action. And what I mean by that is that something else sort of looks like it's supposed to happen, or something else is trying to make it happen, and it gets a little bit fuzzy. But with Kim's images, they're all super clean. So again, this is like the notebook part. This is what it looks like on paper. This is how I'm going to be able to identify it. Once you're navigating someone with musculoskeletal pain or injury, it's not going to look like this. That's the point. So we want to do that comparison. If you don't already follow her, I highly recommend it. This is her IG handle. Okay. Also, what I've done here on this slide, Val, I know you may appreciate this, is I do not have the name of the yoga poses because the name of the yoga poses is not relevant. There's sometimes where I don't know if it's stress from all the learning, but there's like a lot of feedback in mastery where it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what any of these are called. What matters is what joint actions are you seeing, right? And then we get to identify directly after the joint action, what main muscle is supposed to do that joint action? And then is it, right? And the is it is what we do clinically when we're working with our clients. So I want to just have you guys look. You've had a couple minutes now to look at all the images on the slide. You guys can see them all, yes? A, B, C, D, E, and F. You got them all? Okay, perfect. So have a look here and tell me which letters, which pose by letter has hip flexion in it. Which pose by letter has hip flexion in it? And there's maybe more than one answer. Which pose by
Ah,
letter has hip flexion? What, Val?
you went away.
Oh, I'm right here.
I know, but my screen went away.
I could never leave you.
You want me to start?
Sure.
Um, A, C, F, D, I'm not sure of. I think that's more a rotation than an extension, than a
Okay.
flexion. It's
Okay.
kind of flexed and rotated. So I'm not sure how you would classify D.
Okay. So your answer is A, C, and
F.
F. Okay.
And I would even say, I guess on E also, because she is bent,
Yes,
and the other is, yeah, E.
Great. Great. You got it, Gary?
yeah.
I'm excited for you. This is big because this is what you told me a few months ago was still something you were learning. So look at you go. Fantastic. Okay, Gary, do you see any others with flexion, hip flexion?
Um, no, but if you would explain the difference between flexion and extension here, I mean, in terms of the muscle movement. For
Well,
example, in B, uh, um, I mean, can't you have extension and flexion at the same time?
not in the same joint,
Oh, okay.
right? So if we're looking at hip flexion, which way do I make hip flexion happen, Gary?
Um,
What would I have to do to make hip flexion?
bring the femur forward.
Bring the femur forward
Yeah,
like this,
yeah,
right? Doesn't have to be knee flexion,
right,
but this right here, this joint right here is hip flexion.
right.
So can you see how I can't also put him into hip extension while he's in hip flexion?
Oh, of course. Now I
Yeah,
do.
so you
Yeah, of
saw it
course.
now. There you
Yeah,
go. Yep.
yeah.
In
Mm,
fact, hyperextension is the opposite. So this is either neutral or extension, depending on your starting point.
mhm.
The leg behind the axis is either extension or hyperextension, depending on your starting point. And doesn't matter where your starting point is, the hip in this orientation, the 90 degrees with the femur anterior of the body is always flexion, always hip flexion. Okay, so if we look at image A, which hip is in flexion?
Right,
Her right. If we look at image C, which hip is in flexion?
right,
Good. If we look at image E, what hip is in flexion?
left.
Flexion.
Oh, flexion, yeah, right, correct.
Right. Yeah, we're kind of on a theme here, correct? Yeah.
Yeah,
If we look at picture F, which hip is in flexion?
um, right,
And what's the left one doing?
D,
F. We're on F.
yeah. Um, the right is flexing,
And what's the left hip doing?
extending. No?
It's
Mhm.
this is why we workshop it.
Yeah,
Absolutely, right? This is why
yeah.
we workshop it. We think we can see it right away, but then when we
Mhm.
workshop it out, we're like, hmm.
Mm,
Okay, so in F, in F, she's gone and stepped forward with one foot and not stepped forward with the other. Do you see that?
right,
Okay,
correct.
so one foot is forward and one foot is not. One foot would be back here. The other leg is here. And then she took her torso down towards those legs.
Hmm.
So her front hip looks like it's flexed, and it is. If I instead let this be her back hip, and I'm only going to use it because the blue tape is facing you and it's easier to see.
Hmm.
If this was the back leg, the front leg stepped forward, the back leg did not. The back leg did not step forward, but the torso did the same thing. Is that flexion of the hip or extension of the hip?
I don't know. I don't, doesn't look like either because there's no movement there
Oh,
in the joint action.
the movement's right here. The
Right.
movement's right here.
Okay. So but she's then in a neutral position.
She is not
The
in a neutral position.
the femur is up and down, straight up and down.
On F, the
On
picture on the right,
oh yes, but we're looking at the picture, or we're looking at how you're moving the femur, which I'm not sure of your question.
so we want to identify on picture F
Hmm.
what joint action is happening in both hips. You identified that in her right hip, the one closest to us, that one's in flexion. And what is her left
Oh,
hip
I see
doing?
I think I see what you're saying. Because she's bending at the hip down, but the leg is straight. No, yeah, I'm squirreling.
Yeah, it's so
It's still, it looks like it's in hyperextension
Yeah, but
how would it be in hyperextension?
hmm,
because her hip moved forward when she went forward. Though I don't see I don't see how that's in just regular extension. I'm not saying it can't be, but my eyes and my brain aren't coinciding with.
You don't see it's in extension or hyperextension? You think her left hip is in hyperextension?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Picture
And
F.
mainly I'm looking at her ankle, but if she's,
We're working on this picture down here, right, guys?
yep,
yeah,
Okay. So we don't want to look at her ankle.
I'm looking at ankle and hip and it
Yep.
just,
We want to look at her hip. Okay. So here's two legs. I'm going to see if I can do this with Murph. Would you guys say, with two legs on, Murph, if his body looked like this, would both hips be in flexion?
yeah, based on the hip movement, yes.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, just based on the joint action,
Yes.
right? So this is no action in the hip joint. You guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
And then torso comes down. That's flexion of the hip. You see
Right,
it?
because you have contraction of the psoas and the rectus femoris.
Yep, that's muscle ID after we identify joint action.
Okay.
Yep, so keep them separate because it makes it a little bit easier. So sometimes where the confusion is, like the picture directly above it, you could see that when the leg comes up, that's hip flexion. But the truth is that the action happening right here at the joint is this orientation. The ball and socket have done this with each other. So if the ball and socket have done that with each other, and now the orientation is just this way, it's the same joint action. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
It's the same.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's one of the reasons I'm going to really plug this yoga benefit here. It's one of the reasons I love using yoga because it moves in all different directions. It's not always upright with your eyes parallel to the horizon like our clients typically are, right? So we really get to test our joint action when we use yoga postures.
Mhm.
We're hanging upside down and doing all kinds of crazy stuff in yoga. Okay, so we've agreed then that this is no joint action of the hip, and
Correct.
this is flexion of the hip.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If I were to step one leg forward, I don't know if I can do this.
You need
Pretty
Murph,
three
close.
hands. You need 3 hands,
I
Sheena.
do need 3 hands. Okay, if I were to step one leg forward, so now he's in a straddle step. Now he's in a straddle step. And I'm going to bring my torso down like this again. What happened at that ball and socket joint? Did it extend or did it flex? Does it look the same as here? Or does it look different?
She still looks extended.
Mhm. So here's the thing. If it was extended, this would have to be the orientation of the hips and the femur. And
Mm-hmm.
that would mean then that the pelvis would have to be here. But the
Mhm.
pelvis is here. You see it?
Mm,
Yeah, you know what, where the confusion lies, I think, is we're just looking at the position of the leg and not what's going on in the joint.
Yes, Gary.
Thank
And
you.
that is the point. It's joint
Ugh,
action. We're
yeah.
looking at joint action. We're not determining where is the leg in space. You guys heard me say that a couple weeks back. I don't want to be like, well, should my leg be 3 inches back or 4 inches back?
Mhm.
What's the joint action that you're creating,
Mhm.
right? So I'm going to invite you guys, if you really want to workshop this out, stand up and put yourself in a straddle stance, one leg in front of the other, and then bring your torso down. None of us is going to look like Kim, myself included. But what's happening on that back hip?
Oh yeah,
Is glute max contracting or is glute max lengthening?
lengthening.
Then it can't be hyperextended
Mm.
because the opposite of his job is to lengthen. His job is to contract when he's action oriented. I will say that the left hip in this image has less hip flexion than the right, but just because it has less doesn't mean it has a different joint action.
Mhm. Mm.
okay.
Do you get
Tricky.
it?
And I can feel it when I
Yeah.
as I do it.
Amazing. Great.
Mhm.
And then that segues us right into the next principle. What's the muscle that's doing it? First things first, though, we really want to be able to visually ID a joint action. I can't stress that enough because we're going to have a lot of sensation in the stretch. We don't have a lot of sensation in contraction unless we're really working to maximize a muscle's power
Mm.
from like an atrophied place or a place where we need to bring him back into the lever system game. So really tempting, yogis do this a lot, really tempting to mistakenly think that where the sensation is where the action is happening. And that is not true. The action is contraction. There's no action for stretch. Stretch is a response. So we can, if we don't identify joint action first and just try it in our body and see where we feel it, we can still trip up on what we just workshopped out together by thinking that, well, the muscle's moving, so it must be extension then. No, you're feeling sensation of stretch. But the action is contraction. We don't feel that as much. For example, if you go back to the position that you were in, you could do it or you could just remember it if you were just there and you remember everything you felt. When you brought your torso down towards your leg, did you feel psoas contract?
Mm-mm.
No, you
No.
didn't feel the action, but you felt the stretch. You feel glute max and hamstrings and maybe even into paraspinals. Is that true?
Yes.
Right. The sensation is in the stretch, but the action is contraction. If you remember that like a mantra, it'll really help you ID what muscles are at play here. Who needs your help? So if I don't feel the muscle that's contracting, I have to know the joint action and the muscle that does that joint action so that I can restore that action and correct the movement. I'm not going to get it from sensation. Sensation is stretch. So that's one of the reasons why I parse them out. Just ID the joint action, pause, then bring in your knowledge of primary muscle action. Does that make sense to you now?
Mhm.
Workshopping it while we parse
Yes.
it out? Great.
Mhm.
And it's easy to get confused. Like, what am I actually seeing until you memorize what joint actions look like in all directions? Standing up, facing the floor, upside down, etc. So think about it like this. When yogis go upside down and they're in a handstand, and I really like teaching anatomy to yogis at this moment because they're hands and their postures, and they're like, well, no, it can't be flexion. I'm upside down.
Uh-huh.
But what we're looking at again is not our orientation to the floor. We're looking at the relationship between these two bones and how they're articulating. So if I'm standing, still hip flexion. If I'm sitting, it's hip flexion. If I'm standing, it's still hip flexion. If I'm in a handstand, still hip flexion. It's still the joint action. So I really recommend for your workshopping to ID joint actions in all of these iterations and really make sure you can just see what the joint is doing, what the relationship between the two bones that make up the joint. Pause there once you've ID'd it, and then go to the muscle that's supposed to do the job, and then check if he is. Okay, amazing. You guys want to do another one?
I have a question. Am
Sure.
I seeing her actually balancing in photo 3? She actually balancing on a tube?
In letter E, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, she is.
Unbelievable.
She's pretty incredible. Yeah,
Wow.
really, like everybody just go follow her right now because it's every picture is flawless like this. Really just exquisite. So it's really great that she does really complex poses too, so that we can train our visual eye on what joint action is happening and then what muscle's doing the job. She helps us with that.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Any other questions? Hip
Mm.
flexion? Okay. Shall we look at another joint action?
Yeah.
All right. In which pose do you see lateral rotation of the hip? Lateral rotation of the hip.
D.
B like boy,
D as in dog.
D as in dog. Okay. Lateral rotation of the hip. Gary, do you know what it is?
Yeah,
Okay.
it would be her right leg
In which picture?
in the D.
Okay.
Uh, maybe not.
Okay, what are you basing it on? Are you going by muscles again?
I'm just trying to figure out where her hip joint is in space there.
I love it. Okay, good.
Uh,
Okay, so we think that it's in D. We think lateral rotation is in D. Just before we dive in, are there any other postures here that also have lateral rotation, or is it only D?
A has some, her ankle, and well, hmm.
hmm.
I'm looking at her foot, and I know you say look at her hip, but with the dark pants, it's kind of hard to see if there's actual rotation there. If it is, it would be slight.
Okay.
Um, but her foot isn't forward, so it's pointed out to the side, which would indicate that it's rolled out somewhat.
Okay.
Can we use
Because it's
that?
because the let's face it, the tibia doesn't twist out from the knee that far.
Okay.
In what Val's saying, can we use the foot as an indicator of what's going on or not?
You could try, but I'm about to blow holes in it.
Okay.
And you, I'm sure if it could be done, you will do that. But like I said, I can't actually see movement in the dark pants there. It's easier
Yeah.
to see in D versus A.
Yeah, I get
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yep, I get that. So are we in agreement that if there was lateral rotation in A, that it's the left hip, the one that's closest to us?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
beautiful. Let's pause there. And now which hip in image D do you think has the lateral rotation?
The right, the one farther away. The foot is pointed one direction. I'm looking at her belly button, is what
Yeah.
is making me think that she is laterally rotated there.
What do you
And
mean?
I think it's the left.
Do you think it's the leg away
Left,
from where she's
left,
looking, Gary?
left hip. Yeah.
The one away from where her eyes are?
Yes.
Okay. And Val, you think it's the one that her eyes are gazing over top of?
yes, and I think
Interesting.
C is also on the not the flexed hip, but the neutral down. Looks like she might be a little bit lateral, but I can't see the outside of her hip.
In image C?
Possibly. Her neutral might be a little bit for balance. Is that
Mm.
possible?
Well, it wouldn't be for balance because you don't need lateral rotation to balance.
I'll strike C. I'm looking
Okay.
Yeah.
closer. All right, I'll
Okay.
take that one back.
Yeah.
I would say, um, if we were to blow up image C and you were to look a little bit closer, or if you were in person with someone,
Mm-hmm.
if the side seam or the inseam of their pants is absolutely
Right.
facing you while you're standing at their side, then there's no
Yeah.
lateral rotation.
Right.
Okay.
And if we were to blow up the picture, you'd see it. Like there's a little bit of it right there. So
Okay.
I appreciate what you said, and you can't see her whole foot, and her pants have a design on them. But I looked at this one really closely, and it's not there.
Okay.
It's also not needed in that particular pose, and you don't have to
Okay.
know the pose to know that, but I'm just backing it up and backing it up again.
Okay.
Okay. So we're looking at A then. Let's go for A first and then go for D. So we think that her left hip has lateral rotation.
Slight. Not a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yes,
Okay, based on
I
what?
agree.
Based on
Well,
what?
I'm again, if her foot were forward, which it's not, it would
Yeah.
bring, it would change the orientation of the femur and the hip. But her foot is turned out.
Mm-hmm.
And when I do that, I feel a change in the hip joint.
What do you
Yes.
feel in the hip joint, Gary?
Pardon me?
What change are you feeling in your hip joint?
It's lateral. The hip,
Rotates.
yeah, rotates out.
You feel it moving. Yeah, great. I love that. Well done. So, and I'm going to take the foot out of it here in a second, but you did use it as part of your visual assessment, which is no problem. And I just want to make sure that we don't only rely on the foot. And that's why I said I'm going to blow holes in that in a second. So I love this. You guys did it perfectly. And probably because you don't have all the yoga poses memorized, this one really gets sticky for yoga teachers. So if you're a yoga teacher and you're here listening, listen up. All right. So do we all agree that her belly button is facing forward, the
Yes,
same direction as her nose would be if she wasn't looking up?
yes.
Yes.
Okay. So there's no rotation in the trunk. There's no
No.
rotation. She's straight forward, right?
Hmm.
And in this particular posture in yoga, we typically will, well, it doesn't matter if we step forward or back, but what happens then is that the back foot is questioned, like, does it turn out? Does it not turn out? Do the toes point forward? Do they not point forward? So there's all this confusion about should the toes be forward or at an angle or forward at an angle? That's a style difference, and
Mm.
none of that changes the joint action at the hip. You can try it in your own body. And also, another way that yogis get this one confused is that there is the counter action of having the back hip rotated out, but the torso turned forward,
Oh,
right? So
yeah.
they tend to think mistakenly that it's lateral or medial rotation, excuse me, because you're turning forward towards your front knee in this pose. That's
Hmm.
the resistant action, if you will, right?
Hmm.
But just because you feel it doesn't mean that's where the action is. We already said that earlier, that the action is contraction and we don't often feel it. We can, but we don't really feel it. We feel lengthening, we feel stretch. The sensation is in the stretch.
Wow.
So totally fine to use the foot here, and also better to use the joint that you're assessing. Here's why. If we had our knee down, she could still be in lateral rotation of that hip, like in a low lunge.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have the foot to tell us whether there's lateral rotation happening or not. What we then need to know is, should there be lateral rotation in a lunge? What joint action should be happening there? And then we move very quickly into what's the muscle that's doing the job? Is it supposed to? What's the job? What's the joint action? And what muscle is supposed to do it? So in a lunge pose, not in a warrior one pose, in a lunge pose, we shouldn't have the knee lateral to the hip. There isn't rotation in that pose, in that position. In just a straight up lunge, it's
Right,
90-degree angles. It's a different
right.
plane of movement. We talk often about the
Mm.
planes of movement as well. We're not going to do that today because I don't bring in the planes of movement when I'm talking about the 8 principles. But if you're in our coursework, you've already learned the planes of movement. And so that's where this idea would come in. In a lunge, I'm in a different plane of movement than if I'm in a torso rotation. Okay. All right. Now let's look at D, because now we've identified what isn't happening in A. We're not going to rely fully on the foot. We're going to look at what's happening in the joint action.
Well, what did we determine on A?
Oh, we determined that it was lateral. Well, you tell
Okay.
me.
Well,
We're gonna
her knee is actually coming this way a little bit too.
exactly, exactly. So it's not that we only focus on the foot. Your knee, our knee is half of our femur,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
right? So if half of my femur is coming in this direction, unless the bone's broken, the other half's coming in that direction too. And that is lateral rotation of the hip. So I would much rather you look at the knee and the hip than the foot,
Okay.
for a lot of reasons. One, because we just identified that's where the joint action is. And I already told you that where the foot goes in yoga throws yoga teachers off and then they miss the joint action. and the sensation of what's happening is not necessarily the joint action identifier. Okay, so lateral rotation of the left hip in image A. We got it, right? And for those of you who are here live, I see you here. I hope you're also quizzing yourself as you go. All right, now let's look at D. This one is a little bit of a puzzle as well, but for different reasons. And we already said we're not going to look at the foot. I want you to look more at the knee instead. What's happening on, and one of you said it was her right leg and one of you said it was her left. So let's just workshop them out equally. What's happening with her knee relative to her hip on her left leg, the one that's away from her gaze? What's happening with her knee? What direction is it facing?
Toward the floor.
Is it towards the floor or is it towards the camera?
Uh,
I'm with Gary. It's slightly towards the floor.
yeah.
Is it? Look, guys, if this is her body posture, and it is, towards the floor would be down there. Is her knee facing you or is it facing the floor?
Facing us. Facing us.
Facing you.
Yeah.
Okay. That matters because if it was facing the floor, that's a different joint action. Do you see
Yeah.
Mark here?
Yeah.
Right? If it's facing the floor, that's medial rotation. That's not
Right.
what she's doing. What is she doing in that left hip?
I can't quite see it. I mean,
All right, let me give you some
I
other
can't quite see what her knee is actually doing, but
let me give you some other
That's
visuals to look at. Let me give you some other,
abduction.
let me give you some other visuals to look at so you can make that discernment.
mm-hmm.
Do you see through your mind's eye where her ASIS is?
Right.
Yes?
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Okay. So what that tells us then is we have a focal point from the ASIS to the hip joint.
Okay.
They are stacked on top of each other. One isn't away from the other, right? So you just start to use this as intel. Do
Uh-huh.
you see where her belly button is facing?
Yeah.
Which
Toward-
direction?
Yeah. Towards us.
Towards us. So
Mhm.
that means her torso looks like this. Her hip is ASIS is relative to the hip joint, and her knee is facing us. Is there any rotation then on this side? If
Knee is
her,
facing
if her,
outwards.
if her belly button, her ASIS, and her
Mhm.
knee are all facing the camera, is there rotation?
No.
No, there's not. No,
Hmm.
there's not.
Hmm.
There's no rotation in
Are you
that.
talking her left side, right?
Yes, still left.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, the one away from her
I was
gaze.
gonna say.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It's tempting to think that though, and when you're in this position as a yogi, there's a lot of sensation going on, especially in the adductors, because they're lengthening,
Mhm.
because the sensation is in the stretch. So you start to think that there's something going on in that hip that feels like it's pulling inward. It's not pulling inward, it's lengthening away because the sensation's in the stretch. So not
So-
medial rotation.
Yeah. So this is where the snapshot idea comes in. You just, if you're looking at at all the details of that,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. That's why I love to take
Mm.
a joint action position and exactly look at it. Thanks for acknowledging that, Gary. Some other people who might be here live with you might not have thought that the first time around. So I appreciate you seeing the benefit of it, Gary. I'm giving you a little bit of slack, Val, just because it was the yoga conversation isn't really meant to be a deterrent. It's to help us here. Okay, so now let's look at her right hip, the one that's closer to the left side of the screen, and she's gazing over her her right leg. We're
Mhm.
looking at her right leg, her right
Mhm.
hip.
Mhm.
Okay, what's happening in that hip? Is there lateral rotation there?
Yes.
Okay, how can you tell? Based on what?
Because her knee is facing to the outwards. It is not forwards.
Her
And
knee is,
if
okay,
you look at her hip, her leg is off to the side and rotated outward.
Her leg is off to the side and
Right, she's rotated out to her right side. It's not in front of her.
Right, that's
It's
true.
out to the side,
Mm-hmm.
off to her right. It's rotated
correct.
out,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
that's where her knee is pointing, as well as her ankle.
So how do you know then that it's lateral rotation?
Her belly button's facing forward, and her knee is off to the right.
There you go.
Yeah,
Yep, because her knee is not facing towards the same direction that her belly button is, like we saw in the
correct.
last orientation of her left hip.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
mm,
You see it, Gary?
yeah.
Yep. Did you feel it in your body too?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But
So
I'm,
the
what
really,
I'm just, what I'm trying to do is now I'm trying to pull away from what I'm feeling in the body and just look at the photo.
yes. Woo, we just did it. That's perfect. That's exactly what I want for you.
It's a mind bender sometimes.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And I feel like when we let our minds bend in that way, we serve ourselves because we learn instead
Yes.
of being automatic about it, right? If we're automatic, then we miss a lot of detail.
Mm-hmm.
hmm So I'll just say for the yogis that are watching, in this particular asana, this particular posture, it is very challenging for the lateral rotation of the right hip. I would call it the front, but I'm gonna not in a second.
Mm-hmm.
I'll explain why I don't want to in a second. Her hip that is on the same side of her body as her bent knee, it's very tempting to miss the lateral rotation because it is excessive lateral rotation. Most of the time, when folks are doing this pose, yoga teachers and new yoga students alike, their belly button is not facing us. They can't quite get enough lateral rotation of that quote front hip so that what they end up looking like is doing a torso rotation.
Yeah.
So yeah, you see it?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
in
Well, I feel it too. I mean,
yeah.
I'm looking at myself
Mm-hmm.
and
These tissues
my
are
belly
connected.
button's not forward when I'm doing that pose.
Right. So what ends up happening is we put a twist in the torso and not get enough lateral rotation here. And then
Mm,
the back hip now has rotation in it that it's not supposed to have. We just workshopped that out. And now we're not doing a clean joint action on either hip. And we've added strain in the low back.
mm,
And this is one of the reasons why folks leave a quote workout, doesn't have to be yoga, but they leave a workout with aches and pains that they might at first mistakenly not recognize is from non-optimized form and joint action. They just think, well, I just worked out, no wonder I'm sore.
mhm,
But I know a lot of people, a lot of clients over the years who stopped doing Pilates, who stopped doing yoga, who switched personal trainers because they realized, wow, the soreness isn't going away. Maybe this isn't just from my quote unquote workout. And I agree. Not that you know, not that anybody did something specifically wrong, but that we could do better as exercise and movement people. We could do a lot better to optimize movement through joint action and the muscles that are supposed to do that joint action. First, you got to understand and ID what is the joint action. And notice that it took us for our time together today a while.
Mhm.
Totally worth it, by the way. But as you were saying, Val, it's a mind twister. And also, we tend to go fast. We tend to mistake that a sensation is what's actually happening. And every one of those places where we could miss the actual joint action, we're not applying the principle of functional anatomy. And mostly, more importantly, we're not solving the problem for the person we're serving who's in musculoskeletal discomfort, right? So we don't want to make flash decisions unless you're so clear in every single iteration that hip flexion, his leg is tossing around. Hip flexion, is hip flexion, is hip flexion, right? When you can do that with every joint action and not get tousled because the body's in a different orientation, or whether the foot is or the foot isn't, right? When you can really quiz yourself in that way that you don't lose your IDing of the joint action, then you can intercept and do something about optimizing that joint action if the muscle who's supposed to do it isn't there doing his job. But until you've really identified the joint action, I've seen it myself, where you just target a muscle and start blaming him for being a problem child, but actually he wasn't. He was just stepping in for someone else because the joint action wasn't identified. So please do, I invite you all, take your way through all the joint actions that are available in the body and, really workshop them for yourself until you know them. That's one of the things that is the takeaway, I think, for this particular course. I know, Val, you already took the course, so you could speak to it too if you have anything else to add. But for me,
Again.
what's that?
Take it again.
Take it again. Yeah, it's
You
worth
always
it
pick up more.
for sure. It's always worth it to review. And it's
Yes.
one of the first steps for me in my intention to create superstars out of you guys is to have so much clarity around joint action that you don't get tousled anymore. I remember a few times being in conversation with other colleagues, and confusion would come either from me or from them. And like we'd end up confusing each other and take as much time doing that as we all just spent getting clarity. And the real sadness for me about that is that if we just spent all our time together getting confused, who created results? Right? And that's what's sad about it. Not that, you don't know something right away. Take your time to learn it for sure so that you can't get confused, so that no one can tell me that that's hip flexion when it's not. I can see it. I spy it. My visual assessment is sharp. And now I'm also taking myself on and learning the muscles that do that joint action. I feel like learning muscles and their movement without having joint action is also confusing. Because then it's just memorizing a lot of data, but not having an application to it because you don't see how it's supposed to work when it's doing its job.
Yeah.
Really, I'm all about joint action, guys. So yay for functional anatomy. Did you guys learn something today?
A lot.
A
Yeah.
lot?
Mhm.
Oh, good. I'm so
Mhm.
glad.
Mhm.
Yay. Okay, good. Well, that makes it happy for me that we're all here together workshopping it out. I know you, Val and Gary are both in the club with us, and anybody else who's here watching on the replay, if you're not in the club or you want to be, we're workshopping this out. This is literally what we're doing in the month of January. That's what applied functional anatomy is. And every club member has access to that course for the entire month and all of the workshopping that goes with it and the worksheets, and I'm in there, and our advocates are in there every Tuesday with a study group. So you can workshop it out with practitioners who've taken the course at least twice. They've all taken it at least twice. So please feel free to jump into the study group, Val and Gary, if you guys want to workshop it out with your peers, because they're in there every Tuesday. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys again next week for more functional anatomy.
I have a question.
Okay, sure.
What's with all the alphabet letters you're popping up on the screen? Does that have to do with the club thing?
That's the pin.
It's Pin It to Win It. It's a new feature on Tuesday training.
Okay, I've missed it. I've been still dealing with stuff, so
That's okay.
okay.
So again, Gina, to apply the letters that we saw, we go into the website to school, and then where do we go to put this information in?
Yeah, so the Pin It to Win It is for Tuesday training. So you're going to go right underneath this video.
Okay.
And this video is found on the YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
And for club members, we also bring it into the classroom for you so you can find it from within there and you don't have to leave the club to go to YouTube.
So it's classroom.
Yep,
Yeah.
it would be.
Okay.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
All right.
All right,
Thank you.
guys.
Now you're gonna make me rewatch this.
Maybe, Val. Well, you told us that sometimes we get to review, right?
Oh, I do. I do lots of review, more than I like to sometimes.
We just review it until we don't need to anymore. That's all. I would say review it until you could answer all the questions and then teach it to someone else.
Or until you sound like Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, 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 wah,
Until,
wah.
yeah, well, even more than that, like not that you're blurring me out necessarily, but that you know you could also speak it, right? Like I only teach anatomy that I know and that I use. I won't teach you something I don't know because that won't give you much value. But if I can't teach it to you, then I don't know if I have it. So I would say just review it until you're answering all the questions that everybody else is asking. You no longer have any questions and you could teach it to someone else. And then until we've done that, I think we're all here for review
Mhm.
for sure.
Yeah.
All right, friends. Well, I'm glad that you're committed and that you're here. I'll see you guys in study group maybe or in the club. And everybody else who's here live, I'll see you guys as well next week for more Tuesday training.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you for
Thank you.
clarity.